My father, my father, Daniel Gonzalez, the barber. Daniel Gonzalez, the aerospace employee. Daniel Gonzalez. Dad was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, where my mom was born in the same town. They came from the same town. In fact, their parents knew each other somehow, because his father was a baker in Ponce, and then he died when Dad was very young. I don't know what he died of. I don't know, but he died, and he was a baker, and as it goes in the old days, you had another wife, even though you weren't married. Everybody, all the guys, that was the normal thing. If you were married and you had a wife and kids, you found another woman too. So Dad's father had this other lady that had kids too. That Dad, when we went to New York back in '63, um, I think a sister or something that we went to visit, or Frank went with Dad to visit them, and Dad had these other brothers and sisters that I don't know. Dad wasn't all close with them, but he knew them, and he had some kind of contact with them. We never did. All we knew of was Tio Pancho, Esteban, Celito, Tio Tonio, and all that, Titi Fefa, Titi Lola, Titi Goita, all that kind of stuff. So, when my father's father died, and there's a picture of him with Titi Fefa, that real old picture, which I will insert here when I develop this more. But let's see, when he died, my grandmother, my father's mother, went to the house where he was sick and dying. And my dad said that both women hugged each other and cried until he passed away. And then Dad said that his mother never went to go visit that lady ever again. But his mother told my dad, and probably the other kids too, you have brothers and sisters over there, go and visit them and be friendly with them. So he did. And there's not much of a story to that. That's the end of that. I don't know what kind of contact they had in the future when everyone was growing up, but Dad did know of them. Okay. When Dad was a little kid, he was hanging out with other little bad kids, little criminals in the neighborhood in Ponce, and getting in trouble. So I don't know if it was one of his uncles, somebody that knew Dad when Dad was a little kid, grabbed him and took him to the barber shop in Ponce, which is still there, and we went to go visit that barber shop. Well, not visit, but I have a picture of it, I don't know if I still do, of Dad, because Dad goes, well, that's the barber shop, and there's only one old barber shop in Ponce, and that's where Dad learned to be a barber, because that uncle, or whatever that guy was, took Dad by, grabbed him, and here, show him how to do something here, because he's hanging out in the streets and going to become a little criminal. So then Dad learned how to be a barber in that barber shop in Ponce. And then that guy that was the head of that barber shop, or whatever, I forget what his name was. Then he came to New York then years later, and there's a picture of him too. And he's continued to be a barber. So Dad learned how to be a barber in that barber shop, and then when he got older and came to New York, he continued to be a barber. See, according to Dad, Tio Tony went to New York first. Tio Tony was a merchant marine. And I don't know if he was a merchant marine on Spanish ships from Spain, but he spoke Spanish in that Spanish way from Spain. So he was a merchant marine. And then he sent for Dad, I think first. I don't know the whole story. And he taught Dad how to dress. Back in the old days, you can buy a suit. A suit that same material and quality of that suit from back in the 20s today would be a few $1,000 suit, because clothes way, way back when, clothes was made well, like everything was made very well long time ago. Nowadays everything's cheap. It all comes from China. So then Dio Tony taught my dad, took my dad to a haberdashery, a place where he bought his suits and ties and shirts and all that, and shoes. So my dad dressed very well. My dad always dressed very well. In New York, you did dress well. If you had any kind of pride in yourself, you dressed very well with the hat, because that was back when, you know, they call it a fedora. Not every hat's a fedora, but that kind of a style. And a suit, and you knew how to tie your tie, and a white shirt, and a coat, you know, an overcoat, because it was cold in New York, and you had shined shoes and stuff like that. So my dad dressed very well. He would keep his suits at the barbershop, because he was always at the barbershop. You know, that was his job. He married Mom and had an apartment for Mom and all that stuff, and where, Francis and then Danny were born. And but Dad was always at the barbershop because Dad was always working. Dad said that the barbershop was like a men's club. And there's pictures, I will insert these pictures at some point, where Dad's cutting hair and there's all these guys in the barbershop. And I think Dad taught Tio Celito how to cut hair. Because then they were both, that was their business for years and years, the barbershop. And like Dad said, it was like a men's club at the barbershop. And everybody knew Dad and everybody knew Celito. And Dad made a pretty good life cutting hair for many, many years. And then the barbershop went to 110th Street. And then, everybody knew Dad, and Dad knew everybody in the neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhood too, because everyone would go and get a haircut. Because years ago, you didn't cut your own hair. You went to the barbershop. And it wasn't expensive. And you got the shave. You know how you see in those old movies. You went to get a shave with the straight razor and stuff. And my dad knew how to sharpen those razors on the stone. And he'd put soap on it and be shh, 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 shh. I remember as a little kid at home, Dad would be getting ready to take a shave. And he had those straight razors and he on that stone and stuff. And I remember the way he would do it and stuff like that. And my dad had that leather belt that then you go like that afterwards. That's to take off. I didn't know that, but I seen this on This Old House or the Woodwright Shop, that there's like a little tiny, no matter how much you do the blade on the stone, and even knives and stuff, there's always, if you look at it under a microscope, it's like a piece of like aluminum foil, but it's the metal that doesn't come off. You could do it. And if you look at it under a microscope, there's a tiny, all the way along the blade, this little thin little piece of metal that stays there. So that leather, you go like that on that leather strap, and that pulls that off. So that's why you see in old movies, barbers are always doing that thing on the leather strap. That doesn't sharpen it. That just takes that piece off. So that if you don't do that, that's in the way, and you can't get a good shave. So Dad knew how to do all that stuff. Dad knew how to cut everybody's hair. He tried to teach us when we were little, but we really didn't want to. And I think Dad thought, well, it's okay. You guys don't have to be barbers. So, the barber shop. All right. World War II breaks out. And then everybody's joining up. My dad was like 45 when World War II broke out. I think maybe 44. So you can still join up if you were still that age. So Dad joined up, and he joined the Navy. And I think that was when Francis was around. And he enlisted and then did all of his training and everything. He said that I think it was in Baltimore, at the naval base there. And during his training, at nighttime, Dad would get like a little container of milk and some cake and put it outside of a window, because it's, in that area in the wintertime is very cold. So you can put your food outside and it's going to stay like in the refrigerator. So he didn't have a refrigerator there in the barracks or whatever they call it. So he'd hide his food. He said one time somebody saw it and they stole it and ate it. And Dad said he would play cards with these young kids because, Dad was older. and Dad knew how to cheat people. So Dad would be playing cards. He said he'd play cards with these young kids, and then Dad would go, "Okay, I win," and throw his cards down and take the money and never show the cards. That's a trick that if you don't know, know it, people rip you off. And my mom, in a video that I have, my mom asked my dad, "Well, weren't you ashamed of that, doing that kind of stuff?" And my dad goes, it was the way you played the game there. So then my dad was in the Navy. He got a cushy job cutting admirals' hairs and these high brass people in Baltimore. He was the barber for, the big brass there. And he would be cutting these, not generals, but admirals and all these other, commanders in the Navy. So my dad wanted to go and fight the war and, wherever they would send him. And he kept on asking them, "I want to see action. I want to see action." And they would tell him, "Are you stupid? You got the best job in the world. Just stay right here." So my dad kept pestering and pestering. And they said, "Okay, that's what you want. We're going to send you." So he was stationed on a ship in the South Pacific. And he said he saw all kinds of action. The ship wasn't a battleship. It was a supply ship, but they also had guns. They had a cannon, whatever they call them on the ship. So his job when it was battle stations was handing from the magazine, handing the shells out to the people that would put them in and fire them. And he said every time that would go off, it would go boom. Every part of your body would shake in the inside and everything. So he realized that he made a mistake, but hey, you got to stay there. It's too late now. But Dad was a barber on the ship. Battle stations, he did that handing the shells. But during normal times, Dad's job was to be a barber. And so they had a barbershop on the ship, and Dad lived in the barbershop. He didn't have to sleep with the other guys. He would sleep in the barbershop. And he said the barbershop there was near the kitchen. So he said at nighttime he'd sneak out, go to the kitchen and steal food and come back and cook stuff in the barbershop. And so that was the first time Dad was in the Navy. So when you cross the equator, they do that whole ritual that they do to everyone. That's the first time you cross the equator. They do all kinds of tricks and stuff on you and stuff. Dad had pictures and stuff. I may show those. So Dad knew what they were going to do because it was his first time. So he hid, and they didn't get him. But all these guys before that were saying, "Oh, you cut my hair all messed up when we first came here. We're going to get you. You shaved off my sideburns and all this stuff. Just wait till we cross the equator. We're going to get even with you." So Dad hid and didn't get in all that shit. Dad would be laughing about it. So when the battle stations would happen, Dad would give haircuts, and you weren't supposed to get tips, but the guys would give Dad a 25 cent, and 25 cent way back in the 40s was a good tip. I don't know what inflation, what a quarter was, but it might be like $4 or something like that. So then Dad had a big old sack full of quarters, and when battle stations came, he would tie that bag of quarters to his belt. And then after a while, he realized, well, if the ship goes down and I got this heavy sack of quarters, I'm going to drown. So he found a place in the barbershop to hide it, so no one would steal it, and he didn't have he wasn't going to drown with a ton of quarters. So then the ship's doctor realized one day, well, Dad knows how to shave real good. He has that straight razor. Well, I could use him in what did they call the ship's hospital, whatever they call it. Then the doctor got Dad to be with him and the other surgeons when battle stations came. So then Dad didn't have to be out handing the shells. Dad was waiting in the hospital there to shave patients that would come in, and Dad said, it was real cool because before any patients came in, they were playing cards and they had sandwiches and coffee and just be hanging out. And that was your battle station. So he said that was great at that time. let's see what else. He remembers them picking up Japanese that had been in caves on some islands in the South Pacific that the Marines had burned them out with flamethrowers, and they came on the ship and they were all burned up, and Dad would help them out. He said a lot of times in certain islands, these real poor people would come out on their little boats, and the sailors would throw them, blankets and all this stuff because they were real poor. But then the captain said, no, 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 those people can't, nobody can come near the ship. Because there was sabotage of Japanese, coming, floating. Like he said, inside of a box, a wooden box, they'd come floating and put a bomb and blow up the ship. So they couldn't deal with anybody coming nearby. Dad was there at Iwo Jima. I think it's when they raised that flag that they have that monument in Washington, I think it is. And it's a famous picture of all these guys raising a flag at Iwo Jima. He said he was there on the ship and could see that happening. Let's see. What else about Dad in the Navy? So then the war was over. And all of the quarters, okay, he said that he went to New Guinea, I think it was, when he was on the ship. And he had tons of quarters. So he wanted to change it into, bills. It wasn't that heavy. So he went to a bar that they had said they would change money for you. So he went to that bar, and it was like this corrupt, criminal bar and stuff. And Dad changed all his money. And they didn't cheat him or anything, and Dad had his money, and the Dad's going to leave, and they go, hey, have a drink with us. And Dad already knew. Dad was from New York. Dad wasn't a stupid guy. Dad had some street smarts and stuff. So they said, no, Dad goes, no, I don't drink or anything. Oh, come on, have a drink. They wanted to get Dad drunk and, knock him out and steal his money. So Dad, wasn't a dummy. So Dad says, okay, I'll have a drink. And Dad had one drink and left as fast as he could. They didn't get a chance to get Dad drunk and rip him off. So then Dad, I think, had around $10,000 when he left the Navy. And that's the money that he bought the barbershop with. So then, what else? Dad was very close with his family. Because in Puerto Rico, they were dirt poor. Extreme poverty. Because their father had died and it was just a mother. And they had Tío Pancho, Tío Fefa, Lola, Tío Pancho, Esteban, and Tío Tony. I think that was everybody. So then the mother had to go and work. And I think since she knew after her husband died, she knew the bakers, so she would go buy bread and then sell it around the neighborhood. It makes us a little bit of money and stuff. So then Dad and everybody was home, and they were supposed to take care of themselves and not be going out and getting into trouble. So I think that's where Dad and his family were so close together and stuff. When Tío Pancho had that stroke, Dad ran to New York. And stayed there until, Tío Pancho was okay and he was fine, and then Dad came back. I talked about that before. And then years later, when we lived on Manzanita, Tío Esteban was real sick and in the hospital. Well, Dad ran to New York again. And then later, years and years later, when Titi Fefa was sick in the hospital and Dad was already getting Alzheimer's, Dad went to New York. And he got his wallet stolen, and we were all like, oh, God, what's going to happen? But he was there, and he came back, and he was okay. My dad was a very hard worker. When he worked at Rocketdyne and the other aerospace industries, Dad would go to bed early. I was always, we couldn't look at TV after 8 o'clock or 9. My mom would say, apaga esa televisión, tu papá tiene que dormir. That's why to this day I stay up late at night looking at movies or whatever. One thing in Los Angeles after 11 o'clock at night, they would play these old movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s and stuff. Real cool old movies, George Raft and Humphrey Bogart and those kind of movies. And I love that, but I could never look at them. That's why I've looked at almost all of those movies now. And I still love black and white old movies. So we couldn't look at TV late at night. Because my dad would go to bed early and get up, had to be at work at 7 o'clock, I think it was. Because yeah, it had to be because he was already out of work by 3 o'clock, and then by the time he got home at 4, and then we would have to eat at 4:30. But yeah, my dad knew how to paint. He didn't want to be a barber anymore. He would give people haircuts here and there, but he didn't want to be a barber. He did get his license for California when he first came, but he didn't want to do that anymore. He was sick of it. He had done that enough. I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40 years he was a barber. And then when we went back to New York in 63, the barber shop was there on 110th Street, and that's where Dad had to work and do something, so he was working there with Tio Celito. At the same time, looking for a job all over the place in New York, and he didn't find a job. He did shoveling snow at one time, and but he was doing barbering. So then Aurelio called up one day, and Aurelio and Francis knew that Dad wasn't making it that well in New York. So Aurelio said, "Come back to Los Angeles and work with me, and when you get enough money, you can send for everybody to come back." So that's what Dad did. He worked with Aurelio in the typewriter shop, and then I think he flew back to New York, bought a car, and we came back to Los Angeles, which was wonderful because I hated New York. I talked about that before. So we drove all the way back to California. And then Dad would work at Aerospace on and off, but mostly he had a job at Aerospace all the time, but there was a few times he was out of work and stuff. One time he worked in the meat cutting plant, like Oscar Mayer, and he drove the truck that would deliver meat to different places. There would be meat in big barrels and stuff, and he'd drive to like Oscar Mayer, and then they'd inspect the meat, and he said Oscar Mayer was the most picky about the meat and stuff. Because he said other places that he delivered meat to, the people open them up and look and pour some salt on it and say, it's okay, and buy it and stuff. But Oscar Mayer wouldn't. If it was kind of weird, they wouldn't accept it. And what else? And we were he was the manager of those apartments, and he still worked, but he was the manager, and I pitched in. Danny didn't do anything. Frank was too little. Painting and scraping and changing windows that broke and putting tile on the floor and stuff like that. If something was real big, one time the plumbing I don't know what happened, the sewers got clogged and stuff, so the Virginia George was the person that owned the place. She had this Japanese plumber guy that it was his company, and they came, and that same Japanese guy did other plumbing around the apartments we were managers of. So I don't know, maybe I got to do another video, some more things about Dad. But one thing, Dad was a very hardworking man. He didn't hang out with his old buddies from New York because he separated himself from all those people. Because my dad didn't drink and didn't smoke. And once in a while we'd go to some party, like I said, at Pop's house and at Fernando Noveroles. But basically Dad was a home guy, great father, worked hard, got up early in the morning, went to bed, early at night. And basically, was our good father, even though when I was a kid I thought Dad was, not so good. But I know now Dad was a wonderful father, including my mother was a wonderful mother. Okay, that's it. Goodbye.